Thanks so much to the organisers of this session. I really appreciate it. My name is Anne-Marie Tho. I'm a professor in public policy and health at the University of Sydney, and my research focuses on policy and political economy of nutrition. And so it's a real delight to chair the session today. We have 5 speakers who are presenting quite diverse perspectives on political economy issues relevant to agriculture, nutrition and health. And to begin with, I'd like to, is this a change in order? Sorry. Anyway, I can talk about political economy forever, so I'll just bridge this by saying that I think one of the really critical aspects of this session is that it really spans these critical kind of black box issues. We often look at policy making and wonder why the evidence just doesn't come out the other side, why the policies that we see often look different. And I would argue that political economy analysis and related approaches can help us to understand what's in that black box. So I'm going to welcome, I'm still not sure who I'm going to welcome. Sorry, everybody. I see you, Marcus. I think we're going to make this happen. So I'm going to go ahead and welcome Marcos Dominguez Vieira, who is from the Wageningen Social and Economic Research Centre. He'll be speaking today on food systems, transformation scenarios and policies in Vietnam. Thank you so much, Marcos.
Thank you for the presentation, and yeah, my regards to everybody in the room. So I'm going to present to you a trade-off analysis of the possibilities for transformation in the food system in Vietnam in the lens of a global macroeconomic model that can simulate for the long term. And this is a joint work of me together with some colleagues from Wageningen University in the Netherlands. So next, please. Next. So a bit of the challenges in Vietnam. So there are several challenges in the Vietnamese food system. So as in many countries in the world, we see that in Vietnam, experts see some diets going in a healthy direction in the country, some more Western type of diets. There are also some challenges in agriculture as young populations are migrating to cities due to low returns in agriculture. That's another challenge. Next. We see also impacts on food safety, like that there is important, a very high use or overuse of chemicals in agriculture, which has implications for food safety in the country. And then there is also, as Vietnam is a big producer and exporter of rice, we see that that's a big source of emissions from rice production in agriculture. That's a fourth challenge. Next. We also see rising sea levels, which has implications for sanitization in land, but also a competition for land, where basically the industry is expanding, and there are incentives to expand industry, and which together with urbanization creates a competition for land in agriculture. Next. So this brings on a call for action from both the consumer and production side to address these challenges. At the global level, there are increasing action. For instance, there is this call from this Food Systems Summit from the UN, where more than 100 countries sign up to develop their own national strategies to transform their food systems. And in the case of Jordan, they created their own national action plan 2 years ago for transformation of the food system, which comprises a set of consumer and production strategies for this topic. Next. Next. So we use a global model with the objective of assessing next the impact of 2 scenarios. One of them is a continuation of existing policies. I hope you can see this in the slides, which is basically a business as usual scenario of continuation of existing policies on production and consumption, versus an alternative scenario where we expect that Vietnam implements consumer and production interventions from this national action plan on food system transformation that I just mentioned, which we call LAP for the rest of the presentation. Next. We use for this a global model called Magnet, which is used for long-term simulations. It's basically a general equilibrium model that you can input different interventions or scenarios we call, and based on key or neoclassical economic theories on demand and supply. This produces outputs on different outcomes, not only economic, but also environmental, like impacts on emissions, biodiversity, and food security. Next. We didn't do this exercise in isolation. We had the chance to engage for a couple of years with different experts from Vietnam on different topics, experts on the economy, on the environment, food systems, from different institutions in Vietnam. Next. Yeah, which provided some insights and they did some validation of the data. Now I'm going to show to you what is the shape of the scenarios. So first, the business as usual scenario. Next. This scenario, as inputs, we always include in the scenarios. We normally have projections from economic growth, population growth, how agricultural productivity is going to behave. And on top of this, we also see the other inputs like how diets change. So in the model, you can simulate any diet. In this case, we assume business as usual conditions, there is going to be a shift towards Western diets. Next. And then we have the scenario where we compare this with a scenario where we implement consumer and production interventions from the NAP, this National Action Plan on Food System Transformation. Next. This scenario includes, again, the same projections on economic growth, population, and agricultural productivity, but on top of that, and that's the beauty of this scenario, you can have the simulations where all together, this gives you the impact of different interventions happening simultaneously. So on top of this, we also add consumer policies, which I'm going to explain, and some production policies from the NAP. And we expect to see impacts from now until 2050. Next. So this is a bit of a summary of the NAP policies. On the consumer side, there is the broader impact comes from a simulation of adopting the Eat Less diet, a global reference of a sustainable, healthy diet, which is adopted by 2050 by the whole population of Vietnam on average. That's the assumption. Next to that, we have production policies. Oh, you went ahead. Oh, can you please go next? I think you move ahead very fast. So then, okay, I'm going to explain to you now the impacts. This is first the impacts of the business as usual scenario, impacts from 2025 to 2050. So we have indicators on the society and the environment. So we see, for instance, on societal parts, the model shows a little bit somewhat improvements in diet because there are things that are improving, things that are worsening off. But in average, diets go slightly on the healthier direction. That's something we found. The key outcome in society is that actually self-sufficiency in agri-food is deteriorating in the future. And this is important for a country like Vietnam, which is normally high level of self-sufficiency. So this is gonna be a negative outcome in the future. For the environment, the key aspects to address are gonna be land use and GHG emissions. So based on the outcomes, we see that the use of land is going to increase in the future, but also GHG emissions are going to increase way more. And this is also important because there is already a trend towards a higher emissions, and this is going to exacerbate even more. Next. So now the impact of a partial intervention. So I want to show you the impact of only implementing the NAP consumer policies, which is this change in diet towards the Eat Less diet. Next. So this partial scenario, of course, we expect a high increase in the diet. So this is a comparison versus the outcomes in the business as usual scenario in 2050. And we are going to improve even more. But then self-sufficiency is going to be compromised on the societal part. For the environment, basically to produce healthier diets for a larger population, it's going to require more land, more water, and a more intensive use of fertilizer. But some pushback in the use of GHG emissions in agri-food. So we see actually as key trade-offs in this case that regardless of diets improving, the self-sufficiency is going to deteriorate. and most indicators deteriorate on the mental part, and only GHG emissions improve. Next. Next. Now the scenario where we see both consumer reproduction policies. In this case, as we saw, in business as usual, but also in a scenario where only consumer policies are implemented, self-sufficiency is going down. But altogether, we actually complement that with production policies. This manages to neutralize the impact of self-sufficiency in this case. Next. Land use, we have a similar outcome. In a way, we require more land to produce healthier diets in case we only implement consumer policies. But actually, regardless of these healthier diets and a large population and other drivers, if we complement them with the production policies, we actually see a pushback in the expansion in land use. Next. GHG emissions, that's one of the key outcomes. I think I didn't manage to show you, but in this scenario, we model some genetic improvements. So livestock sector with animals that emit less, and also new production systems of rice that is produced and emits less methane, in this case, less emissions. And you see actually that if you altogether put the consumer and production policies from the NAP, we have a net effect where basically emissions in 2050 are going to be lower than emissions today. Next. Now the conclusions. Next, please. We see that actually, if no action is taken, Vietnam will face increased challenges in the food system for society in terms of self-sufficiency and the environment in terms of land use and emissions. We also see that either consumption or production policies alone will not reach the desired impact. So we need a holistic approach, such as the NAP in this case, which is already a strategy that is put in place in the country, that combines all these policies, will enable having healthier people, but also no deterioration in import dependency and less environmental damage. Next. Yeah, thank you very much. And I'm looking forward for the questions that will come later.
All right, thank you very much, Marcos. I just wanted to thank you and to highlight how valuable this type of data is in articulating the cost of inaction. But also, what stood out to me was the really clear support in your analysis for multi-sectoral policy action, reflecting that multifaceted approach to addressing nutrition. It was brilliant to see the combination of production and also consumer side interventions. So thank you again. It's now my pleasure to invite Neha Yadav from the Jawaharlal Nehru University in New Delhi. She'll be speaking on reshaping agrarian futures. Thank you so much, Neha.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Neha, and currently I'm associated with Tata Memorial Cancer Hospital in Bihar. Today, I will be presenting my research titled Reshaping Agrarian Future, Power, Identity and Transformation in Uttarakhand. Uttarakhand is a Himalayan state in India. So this study examines how historical legacies and social hierarchies shape differential vulnerabilities and adaptive capacity among rural mountain communities with a focus on climate, food, health nexus. The main objective is to critically analyze how agrarian transitions and climate change intersect with the identity and power to influence food systems, nutrition, and resilience in the Himalayas. Next slide. So the Indian Himalayan region, which is known for its spectacular landscape, rich history, and vibrant culture, is also on the front line of climate impacts due to its unique geographical and socio-economic characteristics. Next, should I move it on my own? Okay, thank you. Now talking about why Uttarakhand. Uttarakhand is an important segment of the Himalayan region, and Himalayas are the youngest mountain ranges in the world, and by origin, Uttarakhand is susceptible to the natural hazards. And now it is, now with the changing scenario, we can consider that it is most vulnerable to the climate-mediated risk as well. Well, looking at this graph indicates in the last this graph is being built on the time period of the last 100 years. I mean, the last century. It actually help us to understand that with time, the precipitation, the average precipitation remains relatively stable, but there is a rise in the temperature. Although the average precipitation remains stable, but there is variation and fluctuations in the precipitation, specifically if we look at in the space and time. So now whatever rain was happening in the 3 months of time period, now that much amount of rain is now happening in 5 days, and that's how the mountain region is not actually prepared. And I mean, no city is actually prepared to receive this much of water in one go, and that leads to the flash floods. So as we delve into the complexities of climate change, it's crucial to understand its disproportionate impacts on various communities. Reason being, as the mountain communities is heavily dependent on climate-sensitive sectors like agriculture and fisheries, and due to its geographical remoteness, many times they have low diversification, low livelihood diversification. So the consequences of climate change are likely to be more severe on communities and households who are less able to adapt to it. And these all have a knock-on impact on the health outcomes. Let's understand by seeing this this table. So this table indicates the last 15 years of the data that is being collected by the National Family Health Survey. This table constitutes that with time, the stunting, wasting, and underweight percentage decreases in the children among 5 years of age, but at the same time, anemia remains the most important challenge in the children aged 6 to 59 months, and as well as for the women in the age group of 15 to 49. So all these factors help us to design the conceptualization of this study, the empirical evidences and whatever knowledge base that we collected from the ground and from the other sources. So it helped us to draw a connection between how climate change is increasing the vulnerability in the Himalayan region, as well as impacting the food security and nutrition, as well. But this is not the only thing. There are other changes that happened in the past in the form of green revolution, other agriculture policies that happened that actually stress the food systems, and then agriculture is also changes in agriculture is also impacting the food security, and again the livelihood changes, and the people who are diversifying are not able to diversify, also putting an impact on the food security. So once we try to look for the adaptation to climate change, this study also looks at the cross-cutting themes that are gender, ecosystem, and governance, as well as as I'm going to specifically talk about the barriers of adaptation. There are differential coping capacities, contextual vulnerabilities that is imposing emphasis on that. So these all are actually responsible for the kind of transformation that is happening at the food systems. Okay, so as we'll be starting the research design in settings, I want you all to see this image. It's a submersion of a historic town. I want to uncover a narrative that underpins environmental justice with the legacies of colonialism and post-independence push for infrastructure development. It becomes significant to talk about the submergence of a historic town, Tihri. Tihri was the capital of the princely state of Tihri Garhwal in British India that is formed in 1815, now lives in just photographs and memories of people. To construct a dam, a huge water reservoir, Tehri Lake, has been created, a 28 miles long reservoir that resulted by flooding the town of Tehri Garhwal, displacing around 1 lakh people. Along with people, land and community rights, it also partially submerged the culture, language, belief, social network, and traditional agriculture and food practices prevalent in the region. So it's rightly been said that the agrarian transformation here that happened was not just economic, but also deeply political and gendered, and it reshaped the agrarian future of the communities who are living over there. So I will just introduce you the study area. This study is set up in the 10 hill villages in 2 blocks in Bhilangna and Jakhnidar in Tehri Garhwal districts. Both districts are entirely rural, and more than 65% of the population is involved in agriculture. So Bhilangna is known for its higher elevation and cooler temperature, whereas the lower altitude and temperate temperatures characterize the Jakhnidar. So this selection is help us to do a comprehensive understanding, to ensure a comprehensive understanding of the region's diverse ecological and social landscape. So the demographic profile of this region is the general category constitute the 61%, and the scheduled caste constitute the 24%, and the other caste group constitute the remaining 15%. This information is important because in my findings I will be going to show you that how these caste groups are able to cope or adapt differently. So looking at the risk analysis report of Uttarakhand, which projected that this district has a highest combined risk index of floods and landslides across scenarios and timeline. This increases the importance of that. We all should know that how it is happening and how the changes in the food systems are led by. Also, the Indian Space Research Organization data shows Rudraprayag and Tehri district have the highest landslide density in India. Again, the recurrent episodes of landslides and climate events have an adverse impact on agriculture. As well as when we look at the most significant factors contributing to the vulnerability of the sector, Tehri again has a high vulnerability. So talking about the methodological approach to understand the structural inequalities shaping agriculture vulnerability in Uttarakhand, I adapted an interdisciplinary methodology. First, ethnographic work helped to capture the ground level experience from farmers, especially women, about their land rights, exclusion from the decision making, and access to resources. Second, I used the semi-structured interview to trace how adaptation strategies emerge amidst systemic barriers. Third, through historical and archival analysis, I connected these present days inequalities to colonial and post-colonial lands and water policies, like that surrounding Tehri Dam. Finally, a comprehensive lens allowed me to understand both shifts and continuities across decades in how communities cope with climate vulnerabilities, crop failure, and nutrition transition. I just find it really important to discuss about my positionality, although I'm a native of Uttarakhand, but again, I come from the Dan region, so that's why I'm a partial insider and I have a partial insider outsider position. My familiarity in Hindi actually helped me a lot, but I was not so pro in the local dialect, so obviously that hindered, but I took the support of others. And being a woman, it enabled more intimate conversation with the female as I'm going with them to, when they're cooking, when they're going for their agricultural activities, I'm just following them to their fields, and that it's helped me out. So while looking at the land ownership and social and gender differentiation in the village, the journal category caste group, out of 156, so the sample size was 256, so out of them 166 belongs to the general category. So 96% of them have some kind of land holding, whereas the other caste group, out of 100, only 60 has, rest are the landless people who do, or the laborers who come from the other countries or other districts to work over there. While looking at this, Although in Uttarakhand, on the Himalayan state, women are considered being as the backbone of the economy, as they are the one who is tilting the land, taking care of the household activities. But once we looked at it, the one who is tilting the land, see how much less percentage of female actually own the land. Rest, it is being owned by the men. And in Uttarakhand, migration is pretty prevalent. The male migration is pretty prevalent. So men, you won't find men at the home, but the time that when the crop ripes, when there is a time, then it should be sold and they should get the money. Men come back to the home and then sell the crop and decide upon that what we are going to do with that money. So these are a few quotes from the in-depth interview that I did, and I'm just reading the main experts that despite working on the land for years, I don't have ownership rights. I don't know how to check the weather updates or warnings on the phone. Even I don't have the phone to keep it for all the day. Maybe you can read between the lines that what they have, what they don't have. When we approach the bank for a loan, they usually want my husband's signature or presence. Most agricultural workshops and meetings are conducted during the day when I'm busy with household chores. Looking at the differential livelihood diversification, I just said that I'll come back to it. Once we see that the general population have various ways to diversify their livelihood, on the contrary, the scheduled caste population have less avenues. Like especially talking about the hotel and guest houses or restaurants where the food is served or people live, there is a concept of purity and pollution comes into the picture. And that's how even if they have a courage to open the hotel or a restaurant, most of the time people won't go over there. So that's why their choices become more limited. Along with that, many other reasons are prevalent. The kind of support they are getting from the community, their peer group support, their social capital also play an important role in that. So here, why there is a differential vulnerability. Because of the socio-economic disparities, there is an inequality that is being from my research finding, I can see that there is an inequality to access to resources, entitlement, and the kind of knowledge and information they are getting from the government organization or from the banks or the kind of credit finance. Somehow there is a difference between categorized by the caste as well as gender. When we see the last 30 years of percentage changes in the daily food baskets, it has been seen that with time the consumption of rice and millet increases, whereas wheat and rice increases, whereas the consumption of millet, that was originally the native crop of that region, decreased. And earlier people used to grow vegetables on their own. Now they are buying it from the market. The meat consumptions remains more or less same. And similarly, the consumption of legume decreased, milk decreased. Okay, I'm really sorry. I just missed on something. Food from the market now increased. Earlier it was less because people used to have their own fruit gardens. Whereas the sugar sweetened beverages, processed packed food also increased. While looking at the local resilience strategies, major crop changes over the last 2 decades, there is a significant fall when we look at the millets, the barley, ragi, and maize, whereas there is a rise in the cash crops, the potato, ginger, arbi, and chili. If somebody wants to know me after this presentation, why chili, I'll tell you there is an interesting story to that. During the presentation, as I'm putting it forward, that climate change or the climate-mediated risk are maybe responsible for that, but on the contrary, we found that the second highest percentage goes to the damage by wild animals, and the priority to the cash crop. So obviously there is, for the priority to cash crop, there are market linkages. There are not sufficient market linkages that are available. And damage to wild crop, because I told you the story about Tihri Garhwals. To make this much huge water reservoir, they cut numerous trees. And where would the wild animals will go? They have to find space for themselves and things to eat. And that is how they are the one who's damaging the crop. So while talking about the implication for policy and practices, these recommendations stem directly from the fieldwork insights. We found that structural exclusions, particularly gender roles, persist in how communities access land, finance, and even information. Women farmers often lack land titles or credit access, yet they shoulder critical agrarian responsibility. Policy must go beyond generic climate adaptation. I would say that by recognizing these exclusions and elevating local coping capacities, we can work on it. And the decentralized advisory systems and institutional support to grassroots collectives will be vital for equitable adaptation in Uttarakhand's fragile mountain landscape. Right, so the conclusion is almost clear. Even though people perceive the risk and uncertainty similarly, though their responses to livelihood diversification differ based on social differentiation and vulnerability that exist in the community. And differentiation remains critical to sustaining mountain agriculture and enhancing community resilience to climate change. Barriers to adaptation are not homogeneous, not at all. They stem from unequal access to land, entitlements, knowledge, and institutional support. And there is an utmost requirement for bottoms-up approach, because earlier the technological changes that happened in that region were all up to bottom. They actually followed up to the bottom approach. So, yeah, here I end. Thank you so much. This is me who is sitting next to the river. That's Bhagirathi, who is, downstream is being captured by the, I would use this word, captured by the Tihri Dam. And, this is what I wrote. And I know it's not that poetic, but that's my feeling about that river, about that reason, about the community who exists over there. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Neha. That was a really interesting presentation on these interconnected factors that shape both vulnerabilities and resiliences in these mountain communities. It was fascinating. I wanted to highlight in particular the way you used interdisciplinary research. I think in this space it provided such rich data and really allowed you to make those historical legacies and the colonial legacies visible. Brilliant. And I also wanted to call out, I think many of us would have appreciated the way that you addressed your own positionality so thoughtfully. It was very helpful. So thank you again. It's now my great pleasure to introduce Abdu Umer from Haramaya University in Ethiopia. Thank you so much. Abdu will be speaking on mapping candidate districts for selenium and zinc agronomic biofortification of staple crops. Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon. So I will be presenting on developing a method for identifying potential areas or districts for zinc and selenium agronomic biofortification using mineral blended fertilizers. So one of the things is we have a prevailing micronutrient deficiency in Ethiopia, especially one of our previous projects, which was the geonutrition and the MAPS projects clearly shows that this micronutrient deficiency, specifically selenium and those of zinc, is very prevalent across humans, crop, and the soil as well. So, for example, some statistics show that up to 72% of children are the victims of zinc deficiency, which is associated with many health outcomes and with many value outcomes. But here, the use of selenium fertilizers or this mineral blend fertilizer could potentially be a relatively sustainable approach to address micronutrient deficiencies in developing countries, especially staple crops are more commonly consumed in that area. So when you see some of the national statistics, almost more than 2/3 or 70% of the calorie or the local consumptions usually come from the local productions of staple crops in that area. That is the main premise that we have. And previous economic evaluations and other previous works have also shown that these have potential advantages. So, for example, if you consider zinc, it can be applied in the forms of foliar applications or those of the soil in the forms of groundwater application blended with other existing fertilizers. But regarding those of the use of fertilizer, we need to make sure that this thing should be applied to the optimal level based on the recommendations, because those of the environmental impact and other things should also be kept in mind when applying this in addressing micronutrient deficiency as well. So when we are referring to this the term agronomy biofortification mainly simply means just use of mineral blend fertilizers to enrich the nutrient contents of crops which are usually grown in that area. So it can be one means to increase the nutritional quality of crops, especially for selenium. We have more positive response in increasing the crop contents of common staple crops which are grown in Ethiopia. So with social perspective, it's very important to identify this thing. Similarly, selenium deficiency is also more common. Works that have been done in Malawi and Ethiopia have consecutively or consistently have shown that this selenium deficiency is also more common across the crop. And the major thing is that, especially in our case in Ethiopia, selenium deficiency, especially in the crop and soil, is very consistent, including humans, and it's mainly usually occurs in the very productive area, especially the western parts of the country, where crop productions of maize, wheat and teff is more commonly produced in such areas. So usually selenium fertilizers can be applied in various forms, but for this case, depending on the applicability or the practicality of the issues, some of the environmental issues we considered those of the granular applications of selenium was considered at a lower rate, even at 10 grams per hectare, which is very minute amount have been assumed. So our aim is to develop just a methodology in order to identify potential areas, because we are unable to apply these fertilizers where the land may not need this zinc or selenium fertilizers to this one. So the overall method can be summarized like this, where we have used some sorts of scenario-based or evidence-based modeling and mapping of potential areas or districts. Usually districts in our case, it refers to those of may be considered as a level 3 administrative divisions in our country, where some of the decisions in agriculture can be targeted to where many office agriculturals are working. So we have used those of the human deficiency data, especially on serum levels of zinc and serum levels of selenium levels have been collected for the national levels. We have used that data. Soil and crop data have been used, population density data, those of crop consumption, especially because our aim is what we need to apply these fertilizers to crops which are grown in that locality, to crops which are commonly consumed in that area, and the third one is to soils or crops which are deficient in that particular nutrient within that particular area were considered. Finally, we come up with some mapping and some statistics and some more modeling approaches were used in order to come up with 4 decisions. So simply to make my presentation very short, I'll focus on this one. These 3 regions, which are included within Ethiopia, were considered as a major agrarian regions, where crop data, soil data, rich soil data have been there already. So we focus on the 3 major agrarian regions, which contribute to almost more than 93% of the crop production and some cropping areas of these major staples areas that we have considered in our case. So in the meantime, we have calculated some based on the input data that we have considered. We have calculated some weighting mechanisms where based on the importance of the factor and the directions of the factors as well, and we have identified all these things, and we map it this way. For example, for selenium, it is consistent for across the 3 crops, where the western parts of the country, which is almost the dark reds, are considered as high potential area, where the production is there, the consumption is there. At the same time, deficiencies in humans, crops, and soils is also very prevalent in that area. But the unique thing with zinc usually tends to be very different and even the crop responses tends to be usually it may not be very similar to those of the selenium, where the response is very high in terms of increasing the crop quality. So there are potential pocket areas for zinc, where zinc agronomic biofortification could be. So we consider zinc as a potential alternative strategy or complementary strategy, in addition to other potential strategies to control zinc deficiency, rather than just advocating for a single approach. So we need to target more on the zinc deficiency or zinc agronomic biofortification, whereas for selenium agronomic biofortification, we have major areas, especially the western part of the three regions and central parts of the region for different types of crops. So these are the potential areas that we have identified. We also further presented the number of districts that can be potentially targeted for identifications or for agronomic biofortification in different areas by regions, and at nation level and by three common regions have been presented. Mainly for selenium, we can target all the three regions can be targeted, especially the western parts of the country. Districts which are located there can be potential areas. But for zinc, usually we may have certain differences where majority of the Oromia regions can be targeted for maize for zinc biofortification, whereas teff and wheat can be targeted across the three regions. So this can be a potential strategy to tackle micronutrient deficiency with all the adverse effects in our country, and not only in our country, but also maybe it can be considered, especially with the case of selenium, can also be considered in other countries. For example, we have some evidence from Malawi, we have some evidence in other African countries which have been conducted so far. So based on the relevant input data, we also consider this agronomic biofortification as a complementary strategy, bearing in mind that the environment impact is not that much. Because we have also observed that our farmers tend to use higher amount of fertilizers in certain areas where the potential impact may tend to be there. So other complementary BCC or other farmers practice interventions could have helped a lot in this one. So targeting our intervention rather than just blind shooting to a particular intervention to the whole country or to the whole regions within a particular locality may not help in this one. So one of the things we consider, for example, for our country, we need to consider, or the government should consider this micronutrient deficiency a top priority, and we need to identify a mechanism to target this intervention to a certain locality and to implement or to complement other potential nutrition interventions or multi-sectoral nutrition interventions to tackle micronutrient deficiency. Especially zinc is mainly associated with stunting, and selenium is also highly associated with goiter, which is what iodine deficiency disorder as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Abdul. And I just want to highlight, I think you made this comment on your second last slide about this contextually appropriate specific data means that policymakers don't have to make their decisions blindly. And to me, this is really, like your context-specific, really detailed data is a huge value add for policymakers who often feel that they're in that situation. And I think this is absolutely critical. Lack of evidence can be a real barrier, but evidence like what you showed here from your new methodology can really enable and empower policymakers in agriculture to actually meaningfully consider nutrition in their decision making and understand why it matters. So thank you very much. I also have to say I was really struck by just how diverse the nutrient content of the soils was. Those visuals were just really kind of staggering, and highlights again that it's not just a one-size-fits-all solution. You can address this with the sort of blanket national approach. So yeah, thank you again. I'm delighted to introduce Fiorello Piccioni from the University of Bristol. She'll be speaking on alliances of convenience. Thank you.
Should have a, yeah, here we are. Is this on? Yeah. Hello, thanks for being here. So today I will talk about some of the results that we have collected in a Nimana project that is coming to an end in a few weeks, in which we have analyzed the political economy of ultra-processed foods in Ghana. And before starting, I would like to acknowledge partner institutions that with whom we went to this journey. Some of my colleagues here sitting in this room and colleagues at the University for Development Studies, SOAS, University of London and University of Ghana. And also I have learned in this conference that when you do ultra-processed food presentation, you have to declare that you don't have any conflict of interest, which I don't. So I don't think I need to convince this conference that we are facing huge problems with the growth of the ultra-processed food industry and all the effects, adverse effects on local agricultural economies, public health and nutrition. And the main question I want to address today is, what does the ultra-processed food supply chain and operations look like in Ghana? With that, I would like to focus on the interplay between local, regional and international actors in their impact on shaping food environments in Tamale, which is an emerging urban area in the northern region of the country. Why this matters is we believe that there is a need to develop context-specific understanding of the expansion of architecture of the ultra-processed foods in the Global South, so that we also have policies that are context-specific and address the main issues. And also I want to focus why we conducted this study in Tamale and not maybe in Accra, because we do believe that ultra-processed foods are really developing across all different areas, and especially emerging towns where there is a coexistence between urban, peri-urban and rural areas, but of course in different ways. So we need to kind of unpack that kind of evidence. So I will not go too much into the details of our study design, but I think it is important to mention that our study design is inherently multiscalar. And what does it mean? It means that it takes into account micro, meso, and macro levels of analysis, to which we have matched three different integrated working packages. Work package 1, where we have applied a food environment framework, and we have then conducted 4 photo voice workshops in 4 different schools, 2 in the urban area, 1 public, 1 private, in a peri-urban area and in a rural school. And that helped us to analyze the lived experience of adolescents in relation with ultra-processed foods in this context. The second, the photo voice, back to the photo voice, and this process also helped us to identify the two key ultra-processed food products that then we kind of follow through the rest of the project. Indeed, at the meso level, so trying to understand what happens at the point of consumption to the point of production, we have conducted a supply chain analysis of these 2 particular products. We interviewed vendors, distributors, medium and large, the warehouse companies that had headquarters in Tamale. We also talked to the haulage sector that transported these products around the country. And to the supply chain analysis, we have added elements of power, relationship, and institutions to understand not only a 2D dimension of the supply chain, but a 3D dimension of it. And finally, we have conducted at the macro level actor, power, and policy mapping at the national and global level in order to embed our findings from the meso and the micro level into this more global and national dynamics. And this type of methodology allowed us to draw a quite clear picture of the vertical linkages shaping ultra-processed food consumptions in Tamale. And when I use the terminology vertical linkages, is all the actions, activities, relationships, institutions, and formation of material culture that link production, distribution, and consumption. And when we use a vertical linkage approach, we don't conceptualize consumption as something that is separate from the system of provision of ultra-processed food, but is very much integrated in how production is shaped. In a way, consumption becomes part of that productive system, not isolated from it. Of course, it's also then shaped by individual and social influences. So you can probably see that we have also kept in this kind of vertical linkage depiction of our study, the micro, meso, and macro level, and I will go one by one in kind of telling you the story of what we have found at these 3 different levels of analysis. So let me just, here we go. So at the micro level, we have seen that children express really clear preferences to vendors who in turn adapt their offerings accordingly to accommodate these children's requests. This information is filtered down to the distributors, either small and medium, and to local warehouses of the 2 producing companies. Also to kind of reflect to the, about the previous presentation of informality, the ultra-processed food sector for the vendors is really important. It's a backbone of their livelihood, and it's not a vendors only sell ultra-processed food or cooked food. These 2 different kind of foods are sold and prepared in combination, depending on the clientele, the time of the day, and where the vendors are working that particular time. So at the meso level, where I think it's kind of the most of the presentation is going to take us today, distributors and informal vendors act as key intermediaries. They translate consumer demand into real-time adjustments along the supply chain, shaping availability and flow. And we have observed a hyper-local distribution network where networks allow for rapid and context-specific distribution and consumer reach. The main producing companies, the formal sector is very present also at the local level. The local representative, for example, of the warehouses manage stock levels, pricing, and product display at key retail points, and they make sure that they follow corporate standards. So these kind of actions and networks allows for a corporate oversight at the local level. The market access is also shaped by rules that are set by these companies, and policies such as cash-only transaction are kind of favor only kind of more larger distributors, while small and medium distributors tend to rely on informal relationships and local supplier to stay competitive. This important local presence of the formal sector allows these companies to implement tailored marketing campaigns, such as product placement, free sampling, mobile branding campaigns, which we also seen in South Africa. And these type of local campaigns complement the more national campaigns in Ghana. And then finally, at the macro level, we observed all the typical marketing tactics used by the ultra-processed food companies to aggressively position themselves as dominant players. So aggressive marketing, product reformulation, health claims, shrinkification, interference in policy spaces, CSR, vertical integration, and funding research. But what we also note is that not all the players are the same. We have seen a coexistence between multinational corporations, regional and national companies that compete and cooperate to maintain, increase ultra-processed food consumption in what we have called an alliance of convenience. So, for example, these companies use or tend to use or share same bottling facilities. Local ultra-processed food companies rely on multinationals for different reasons. They depend on them to produce and sell franchise products. They depend on them to access advanced international production technologies, but importantly, they also depend on them on sourcing key ingredients and know-how. And also, the relative affordability of nationally produced products plays an important role in the early socialization of ultra-processed food that Amos Lar was talking about. locally produced ultra-processed foods are cheaper, so they're often the first one that children access to. But over time, when this addictive nature of ultra-processed food builds up and kids grow and start to generate income, they can switch to pricier foreign brands. So to conclude, I would like to make 3 key points. So first of all, multiscalar analysis is so crucial to unveil the full cycle of demand creation of ultra-processed food, which is shaped by production processes as well as social and individual markers. There is a capillary operation of ultra-processed food sector, which mobilizes both formal and informal sectors actors through hyper-local, responsive and tightly networked systems. And the alliances of convenience between global, regional, and national ultra-processed food producers that share infrastructure, coordinate action to shape, maintain, and increase consumption. So if you would like to know more about also the type of other results that we have generated, more in terms of also policy, we have a methodological toolkit that is available and hopefully online in the next week on the IMANA website. We also accompanied with a opinion piece about in an engagement workshop that we have conducted in Tamale just a couple of weeks ago, where we have organized a photo exhibition thanks to the photo voice photos that we have generated in our project. And in that space, we have organized a series of workshops with the students that were part of our work, and the workshop was co-created with them. And at the end of that workshop, we also asked the children of each school to create actions to address ultra-processed food that were context-specific to their schools. So if you would like to have a look, we also have an exhibition. We have also a virtual exhibition. You can use the QR code at the top. And also please follow us on our social media, where we add some news about our project and also put some small digests about our results for like more easy understanding and engagement with our work. Thank you very much. Asante, thank you.
Thank you so much, Fiorella. Really interesting, and particularly the way that you used your interdisciplinary methodology to look at not just sort of the food system generically, but to really highlight the dynamics, to ask like why things are happening. I was really struck too by the way you described the responsiveness of local markets to students, but then the linkages to these macro factors. So thank you very much. And honestly, that visual is incredible, the way that you're able to really highlight all of that. And then on top of that, the industry behaviour, the influences on policy in such a complex setting. So thank you, really fantastic presentation. I'm now delighted to introduce Charlotte Coogan, who's joining us online. She's with the Food Security Evidence Brokerage, and she'll be speaking today on meeting consumer demand for healthy diets with policy actions. Thank you, Charlotte.
Yeah, thanks. Hopefully everyone can hear and see me. I'm excited that I could join, even though I have to be remote. So I did a systematic review with Hanneke van Dijk and Lisa Sherburne on the effects of food policies to generate demand for nutritious diets, and that's what I'm going to be presenting today. So next slide. So the theory of change behind our work is on the screen. Basically, we all know that in recent years, there's been this big push to use food policy to improve consumer nutrition, diet, health, and well-being. Next slide. But there's this idea that like we can find the correct food policies that will shape the external environment, and that will then shift consumers how they interact with food and result in more nutritious diets. Theoretically, these would obviously have to be implemented alongside a whole variety of supportive programs, and there probably isn't just going to be like one food policy that's going to get us all the way there. So the trick would be identifying the right combination of food policies. And so with that sort of theory of change in mind, we decided to really focus our systematic review on the first two green boxes in this theory of change, focusing on the relationship between food policies and consumer demand. The reason for that was simple and utilitarian, actually. We felt like that was a research question that we might actually be able to answer. Ideally, we would jump sort of from food policies to health and well-being outcomes. But in our experience, that relationship ends up getting mired in a lot of complexity. There's a lot of controls that you can't quite, take care of. There's going to be confounding, and people end up getting stuck in we don't knows, and more research is needed. So we felt that focusing on this early part of the theory of change would hopefully help us reach stronger conclusions. And if these food policies aren't actually affecting consumer demand, then it's relatively unlikely that they're going to be reaching down to health and nutrition outcomes. Next slide. So that was the motivation for our systematic review. We wanted to identify and summarize the evidence on how food policies can stimulate demand for healthy diets with a focus on LMIC contexts, low and middle income countries. Next slide. So I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on the methods. Next slide, the methods slide. There we go. Okay. So I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this slide. We followed basic standard practices in systematic reviews, and we set up a PICOS framework with strict inclusion and exclusion criteria. We included primary impact evaluations and systematic reviews from LMIC contexts. And then we also decided to include systematic reviews, but not primary literature from high-income countries, HICs. And so the reason for this was basically in our initial search, we realized that the evidence was pretty limited in LMICs. And we thought that if there was a large body of evidence coming out of a systematic review that made a compelling case for a specific pattern taking place in an HIC, we might be able to learn something from that and apply it to LMIC contexts. So we were interested in all types of food policies. We were pretty broad in our definition, but we ended up only finding evidence on taxes, subsidies, food policies, marketing and labeling regulations, cash transfers, and trade agreements. So that's what I have to present today. In terms of outcomes, this actually got more complicated than we would have thought. And it foreshadows one of the interesting research-related findings in this report, actually. So consumer demand is an interesting outcome because we were thinking of it as purchases, accessibility, affordability, convenience, things like that. And we were explicitly not thinking of it in terms of intake because in our theory of change, intake is the next step in the TOC. But there's this word consumption, and consumption to an economist means purchases, but to a nutritionist, consumption means intake, like dietary intake. So this ended up putting us in a tricky situation where sometimes we actually couldn't tell if the authors were referring to purchases or intake. And a lot of the systematic reviews that we identified actually ended up pooling these two steps in the theory of change and doing their analysis jointly. So our decision was basically if we couldn't figure out what was happening, we excluded those studies. If they reported only on consumption, meaning purchases, we included. If they reported only on consumption, meaning intake, we excluded. And then for the systematic reviews that reported on both, we did the best that we could to disentangle the findings from the two, and we reported on them separately. Next slide. So this is the Prisma diagram that we have looking at our screening process and the studies that we ended up including. A couple of things to note here. We screened 1,300 studies and we ended up including 22 in our analysis. We decided to drop 28 systematic reviews because they identified either no studies that were relevant to our topic or only one study that was relevant to our topic. And so if you remember, our reason for expanding our systematic review criteria to include high-income countries was specifically because we thought they could provide generalizable conclusions. But a lot of these reviews were not finding, they weren't finding much information, which itself is an interesting finding from our work because it suggests that there's a lot of policy interest, and there's been so much policy work done that I think we tend to assume that there's a lot of primary literature out there, but there ends up being a lot of empty set or nearly empty set systematic reviews because that primary literature base just isn't that strong. So most of the studies that we did identify were related to taxes and subsidies, with some studies looking at both. Next slide. So I'm going to start with the results on taxes and subsidies. So we found several systematic reviews and pieces of primary literature on how taxes and subsidies can affect consumer behavior. One thing that was interesting in the systematic reviews was that they had really widely variable conclusions about the quality of their own evidence bases, and that resulted in them being very sort of variable in the strength of conclusions they were willing to reach. Some thought that the evidence was weak and therefore they still were sort of uncertain. Some thought that the evidence was strong and they came out pretty confidently to say that taxes and subsidies do alter consumer purchases. Taken together, it seems pretty likely that taxes and subsidies are altering consumer purchasing behaviors. And there was relatively limited evidence on these supposedly negative effects of food taxes on like economic outcomes, such as convenience store sales. Convenience stores were not going out of business as a result of these taxes. There was one caution that was raised about subsidies, which was that while they might be cost effective in that they reduce healthcare costs, their effects likely end as soon as the subsidies end, so they would have to stay in place for the long term. Next slide. So moving to the school food program slide, the evidence, sorry, can we move, there we, nope, that was too many. There should be a slide in between those. Maybe go one forwards, maybe? There you go. Okay, they got out of order. I apologize for that. But we do have the school food programs work as well. And we found that the evidence here was concentrated in high-income countries, particularly in the US. So this is one of those examples where we have to try to generalize the findings from high-income countries to LMIC contexts. What we found here is that the order in which food was placed, so there's this idea if you go to a cafeteria and you put maybe fruits and vegetables first in line, then kids are going to be more likely to take them. That didn't seem to play out too well in the evidence space. Changing the presentation of food was not changing students' decisions, but we did see that providing free or reduced cost foods did seem to change their decisions as to what to purchase. That aligns with the subsidy finding, and it suggests that these approaches are probably going to, at least they could improve student nutrition outcomes because they are improving student choices. Next slide. And so if we go to the marketing and labeling regulations, we also did not find a whole lot of impact evaluations on these in LMIC contexts, but we found 2 high-quality studies that looked at front of package labeling from Ecuador and Chile, and those were found to decrease purchases of unhealthy foods. In terms of labeling on restaurant menus, most of this evidence was in high-income countries, again, particularly the US, and there was relatively limited evidence that labels on restaurant menus were changing purchasing patterns. So from a policy perspective, the main recommendation was that these labels need to be really simple and easy to use so that people are able to act on them quickly. And, you know, there's no sort of educational or cultural barriers to acting on these regulations. Next slide. And I know I'm running out of time, so I might have to skip through a few of these. So we're going to go to the conclusion slide with the yes, that one. So this is the overall food environment framework that I believe actually might have been made by some folks at ANH, but it's what we were using to try to organize our thoughts about where these different interventions take place. Next slide. So basically, we had these 4 different types of interventions related to school food programs, taxes and subsidies, marketing and labeling regulations, and cash transfers. And most of those, 3 of the 4, are acting on the external food domain, with 1 acting on the personal domain. And we found that taxes, subsidies, and school food programs are the ones that are most likely to have positive evidence for affecting consumer demand. And those are affecting food availability and prices. Next slide. So I think I covered most of my conclusion points already. I just want to reiterate that I think it's really interesting that there is so much policy work being done in this area, and it's causing a lot of interest in conducting these types of systematic reviews. But a lot of the primary research is not there yet. So for the other types of food policies that I wasn't able to say there's strong evidence for, that doesn't mean that we know they don't work. Mostly we just didn't have sufficient evidence to reach overarching conclusions, particularly in LMIC contexts. So sadly, this is another one of those more research is needed, but I think it really shows where we currently are in the academic discussion around how these policies are affecting consumer demand. Last slide. So I just want to stop by thanking the funders of this work, as well as the authors and the participants from the underlying studies. And that's it.
Thanks so much, Charlotte. Thanks. It was really interesting to look at food policies through that food environment lens and think about how they're impacting different dimensions of that food environment, and also appreciated your focus on the evidence or lack thereof from low and middle income countries. I think it is really important to make sure that we're always thinking about whose evidence we're talking about when we talk about an evidence base. It was also really interesting to hear your reflection on the methods and the definitions of terms, in particular in the way that they're measured. So thank you for front loading that. So I'm really excited to welcome all of our speakers to the front for our Q&A. While they're all coming, yeah, please come sit. I just wanted to highlight 3 of my overall takeaways from the session. Really interesting and very diverse presentations. And I think what I'm left with is, again, a reminder of the importance of context and context-specific evidence, and thinking carefully about what it is that we're intervening in. The second thing is how important it is to take these multidisciplinary and diverse disciplinary approaches to understanding the nature of the evidence base, to ask these questions not just about what, but also about why and how. And then the final thing I just wanted to thank the speakers for is the way that they engaged with such a diverse range of evidence for policy. There's an Australian political scientist, Brian Head, who talks about 3 lenses of evidence-based policy, and I think he touched on all of them. He talks about scientific evidence, and also implementation knowledge, so practice-based knowledge as being really important, and then finally political knowledge. And I think it was really brilliant to hear such diverse evidence. So I'm now going to throw to the floor. We have a question over here and here. And here we'll take these 3 questions and then we'll do another round. So,
thank you so much to all of you for those really wonderful and interesting presentations. Well, my question's for Fiorella, and well done on your study. I loved the design, the multi-scalar approach, and I think it was really revealing in terms of the interrelationships between all of these different actors. And, you know, on the public health side, we always talk about coalition building to, you know, build coalitions, influence policymakers. But on the other side, you can see how the industry forms coalitions as well. And these coalitions are potentially much more powerful if we leave them to be. And I was wondering, did you see the big companies teaming up or forming coalitions with the vendors? But we've seen this in Mexico and elsewhere, for example, where the big companies essentially mobilize these small vendors and create almost like a grassroots political constituency that resist that are big, that have influence in the schools, and then yeah. So did you see those coalitions forming and having influence? Thank you.
Thank you. And yeah, please go ahead. We'll just take 4 questions. So.
Yeah, first, thank you for this presentation. I really appreciated the diversity of the different approaches, scientific approaches, and scientific disciplines that are combined into a same presentation. I had some questions for Marcos. Yeah, modeling the impact of public policies is something that is very demanded, and we are on strong pressure when discussing with decision makers to de-risk their decisions and to therefore to provide them with ex ante assessment of what's going to happen if they go through A, B, C, and because of this high stakes, there are high demand of very precise assessment. So 3 questions. One is for clarification in terms of time frame. What's the time frame of your model? Would it be 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years from now that this impact would be effective? Second point is, do you have, when discussing with policies makers also, there's a question on return on investment. That's very common. So how much would cost implementing both parts of this national action plan, and are there some parts of the national action plan that are very costly that will be removed without significant impact? The third question is more methodologic. Do you have an estimate of the accuracy of your model? Like you've got figures like 13.8 or 28.5, which are very precise with 3-digit precisions. Do you have an estimate of the accuracy? Is it 5%, 10%, 20% accuracy of your model, or can you give an assessment of this accuracy? Thank you.
Thank you. And question over here.
Thanks. All really great presentations. I've got one for Fiorella. I was wondering, you had in the sort of macro, I think it was under the macro level, policy influence. And I didn't have a chance to read the methods. It was quite a lot and moved fast. But did you interview policymakers? And then if you can maybe share some of the key findings around what sort of influence was seen. And the reason I'm asking is, obviously in South Africa, we have the SSP tax that was severely watered down by industry interference, whereas Ghana got the 20%. And so I'm just wondering, any thoughts around recommendations also for protecting policy space? And then very quickly for Charlotte, you didn't have time to go over the trade implications. I'm wondering if you can just elaborate a bit on that. Thanks.
Go ahead.
Thanks, the presenters. My first question is to Fiorella. I am happy to learn of the alliances of inconvenience between industries of the same type, like among food industries, because previously I've known about different industries, like the food industry ganging up with the alcohol industry when the tobacco industry is being attacked by public health practitioners. So this is good to know. My question is, which is really not related to what I've just said, why did you choose tamale in Ghana? What was very unique about it to be suited for this particular study? My other question goes to Abdul. I see that there are different types of fortification that can be done, and here I think you may have to correct me. I haven't really been so much into fortification, but I have now learned of agronomic. Before I've had of biofortification and industrial fortification. For these particular micronutrients that you talk about, why is agronomic fortification the better way of doing it. And then secondly, I think we've had a number of micronutrients that we've been trying to address as public health as being of public health importance. Zinc is one of them, and you rightly mentioned it here. Vitamin A, iron, iodine, and folic. I just want to know from you why selenium, because it hasn't really been, unless I'm so outdated, but it hasn't been so talked about so much. Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you so much. We've got about 10 minutes left. And so what I'll do is I'll hand to our colleagues online first. So Marcus and then Charlotte, if you could respond to your questions. And then I'll turn to you, Fiorella and Abdul. And then I'll ask you, Neha, just to make a couple of closing remarks.
Great. Yeah, thank you for the interest on the model results that I presented. So indeed, we see a lot of interest on this type of ex-ante analysis. So I did a very similar analysis for Jordan. So we do this in more countries. So about the time frame, it was an impact from 2025 to 2050. So it's a 25-year time frame. And usually policymakers actually, and Jordan actually suggested that actually they will want to look at the shorter time frame. So sometimes they say, hey, why don't you give us impacts on 5 years, 15 years, because they take short-term decisions. But in this case, yeah, it was 25 years. For the return on investment, the cost of these policies. So I think we didn't assess that. It's quite interesting to have a look at this in another analysis. But we didn't have a look at this part, which is, I think, quite key, especially for policymakers. And then the methods part of the accuracy of the model. So I think we normally just present the figures. And for us, it's very important to see what is the direction, not very often the magnitude. So we don't normally show ranges in the impacts. So we normally show you only one number. And sometimes you can have a look at the quality of the solution, but going in a more technical part, yeah, the type of solver we use sometimes doesn't give you so much information, like compared to other solution methods. So yeah, that's my assessment on these questions.
Okay, thank you, Marcus. I think it's my turn then to dive in with the response to the question about trade agreements. So yeah, I wasn't able to talk about the trade agreements or the cash policies, which were included in our systematic review. That's because both of them, we only found, for each we found 2 unique studies, which just made it a little bit challenging to reach strong conclusions. In terms of the trade policies, we found one evaluation that looked at the effects of Vietnam entering the WTO, and we found another one that looked at the effects of a free trade policy between the US and Peru. And both of these evaluations were looking at SSB sales, so sugar sweetened beverage sales, and they went in opposite directions. So SSB sales in Vietnam increased and SSB sales in Peru decreased, which leaves us with a big what happened there. So I think it's interesting that it doesn't show that it is going to go just in one direction, and there's probably a lot of other dynamics at play with regards to what other foods are also entering the country.
Thanks so much, Charlotte and Marcos. Do we have a mic here for the panelists? Oh, great. Yeah, so Fiorella, Abdullah, and then Neha. Thanks.
Thank you. So yes, I will address one by one the 3 questions that were asked. So about Phil's question about whether there is a coalition with vendors, absolutely there is, not only with vendors but with the whole community in the schools and also on the labor, in the workspace. So for example, Fan Milk, which is a kind of like a Ghanaian arm of Danone, runs training with informal vendors on business practices, how to be effective, how to save, how to access credit, and then basically gives them branded cooler boxes and the branded bicycles to kind of go around and move, as you know, we ultra processed foods are also called, like this product that move fast, to move them faster across the urban setting. And we really see how almost these companies use a gig economy type of model to in their transportation of their products. Nestle runs nutrition trainings in schools and in local government sector. And Milo, which is another very prevalent product, which is like a powder, sugary chocolate drink, sponsors sports events in local communities, particularly in a school. So they really health wash their reputation in local communities. On your questions about what methods we have used in our policy analysis, yes, we have combined a secondary level, a literature review on policy in Ghana with semi-structured interviews with policymakers as well, mainly in Accra. So we do need to also bridge the gap with policymakers that are more local to the Tamale experience. And to be fair, the type of actors that we have conducted semi-structured interviews at the macro level. So the Food and Drugs Authority and Ghana Standards Authority. We also tried to interview the producers, but we had a lot of difficulties, and we managed only to get them to respond to a number of questions in a written form. That's the only thing that we managed to do, and it took us months to get to that point. And then also we interviewed some media agencies to understand what are the limitations that they kind of put towards the food companies in order to advertise their products, and there's none. They only need to have a food and drugs agency stamp in order to be advertised at any time of the day, or even target desired population at specific times of the day. And I will talk about that Food and Drugs Authority stamp in a second. And then we also analyze who the actors are in a beverage award that happens in Ghana every year, and there is a very clear cooperation between government levels, so the Ministry of Industry and Tourism, the Ministry of Tourism and Industry, like a lot of different food and beverage companies and the Food and Beverage Company Association that together they come and organize this incredibly powerful media event for the sector. In terms of how the food policy and regulation is perceived in Ghana, and how it came across in our questionnaire, in our interview, I don't think that Amos is here, but the tax, the sugar tax, it's quite new in Ghana, and there has been a huge pushback by the food industry with a similar, usual narrative around job loss and how it's going to kind of impact GDP growth. However, in our interviews with the Food and Drugs Authority, which checks basically checks only food safety around food adulteration and whether the food has some toxin, and if like some every ingredient is at the right level. We try to kind of understand their take around ultra-processed food and its link with non-communicable diseases, but they were kind of telling us, but that's not our mandate, and we can't do anything basically about it. We know there is policy, we know that there is a growing concern, but we don't have the tools and the infrastructure to do anything about it. And we ran some workshops as well, and there was a lot of conflict in it. Why Tamale? So we wanted to conduct a study in an area, in a context that was experiencing, that was not fully urbanized, because there is a lot of studies, particularly in Ghana, where the market is saturated. In Tamale, we can see basically a transition to that full urbanization, and where there is a proximity between urban, peri-urban, and rural areas. So we could also fill the gap around ultra-processed food consumption and production also in those areas. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for having this question. So the first one is why agronomic biofortification, why we prefer for mineral blended fertilizer. I think we have different types of system intervention to address micronutrient deficiency in addition to supplementation. So one is fortification, and the other one is plant breeding is also there, and biofortification by itself is there, and the additional one that we have is there's no mineral blend fertilizers is there. So when you compare these three options, especially for low income setting, where majority of the crops or the consumptions usually come from the local areas, one means is to agronomically fortify using the mineral blend fertilizer for this one. So this allows for increasing access for nutritious food to the local areas where majority of the micronutrient deficiency usually resides. So if you consider fortification, usually it applies for the urban area who are able to purchase those fortified floors or fortified substance and other things. For zinc, I don't have information, but for gardening, for selenium, there may be some trials on fortification as well. It's not that much. That is why for coverage and for reaching the most needy populations, the appropriate intervention could be agronomic biofortification over the others. And regarding the biofortification, there are many issues, especially the ethical issues, the acceptance and other things are there, especially in low-income countries where people have a little understanding about the overall things that is undergoing with that biofortified varieties. The other one is on why selenium is considered. That is, the public health is important. So we are just, for example, in our case, it is not included in the national health, in the national top priority micronutrient deficiency, where zinc is there, but selenium is not there. Current evidence, especially with our previous project and my work and different work that we have conducted, we can say that micronutrient deficiency, among micronutrient deficiency, selenium deficiency contribute up to 0.164 million DALI, which is very comparable as compared to vitamin A deficiencies that we consider that it is one of the leading public health problems. It is above that, which is very comparable to zinc deficiency as well. So these whole things can indicate that even the crop deficiency, human deficiency can indicate that selenium deficiency should be considered in different parts of, not only in our case, but also it should be considered as well. Or many investigations should have been conducted in other countries as well. That is why we are just advocating for selenium should be a part of that. Thank you.
So it's not clear to me, has anybody asked a question?
No, I just thought I'd give you the opportunity to reflect now that you've heard everybody else speak, but feel free to pass.
All right, sure. So if you ask me to reflect, and I would say that I would be happy, first of all, if somebody would have asked a question to me. Maybe I'm in a wrong session, or maybe I presented it so wonderfully that there is no question, or maybe no one liked it. So it's difficult to reflect at least on that part. And then listening to all the wonderful studies and getting a lot of ideas about that, what needs to be done, what all people are doing globally, what kind of research is happening, and then what I can do next is something that I concluded, and maybe whenever I come next to this academy, maybe I will come back with very different kind of research that is actually brewing. And then I just want to share it that once we talk about the Himalayan community, or the kind of climate mediated risk they are facing, there is another challenging study domain that is coming up. Is like the climate and mental health nexus. And right now I'm kind of start moving towards that side, and then maybe won't be able to relate it from a food and nutrition point of view, but I just found it really, really significant that we need to enter in this challenging ground, because asking somebody that are you facing any mental health challenges or issues, maybe in the developed world it's easy because people know about it, that what they should be telling about and for what they should be seeking a help. But in the global south, and maybe in my country, and specifically in the rural community, it's a little bit of taboo if you ask about it, and then a very different kind of support system they are seeking, but not the institutional support. So I'm happy to move towards that side, as well as keeping my one foot in the nutrition and food and nutrition domain as well. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Nehan. It was definitely the latter. It was a brilliant presentation. Your poem, I wanted to say, was really moving. And also, thank you for this final provocation. I think we haven't talked a lot about mental health. And it's really critical, even from an agricultural perspective. So I hope we've all got some new ideas for the next conference. Can we please thank our panel again? And thanks and bye, Charlotte and Martha.
Thank you, everyone. A quick tea coffee session, and then we meet for the final plenary at about 4:50.